Tonight's speaker is Judy Newland. Judy has been working in textiles for more than 40 years as a maker and later as a textile historian. She has a rich background in textile history and museum anthropology. And interestingly enough, Judy came to us as an attendee of a different library program event. And we're very grateful for her attendance then, and also even more now for her presentation. So with that, I will let Judy take it away with Judy's Magical Mystery Tour.
Okay, thank you, gals. And hello to everyone tonight. Glad to join you out there on the island. Even though, we originally agreed on this talk that it would be called The Meaning of Textiles Through Time and Place, I feel like it turned into Judy's Magical Mystery Tour as I created it. But we all have a story in cloth, and this is my story. I am a retired anthropology professor and a textile historian, but that's just part of the story. I will share with you how and why textiles have been the fabric of my life through time and place, and why that's so important to me. So this is the Magical Mystery Tour itinerary, so you know where we're going. I'm going to talk a little bit about who is Judy and her world of textiles, so you know where I am and a little bit about me. I'm going to talk about material culture, one of my favorite subjects, and it all applies to talking about textiles. A little bit about museum anthropology. What is it? My sons are still like, what is it that you do, Mom? I don't know. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then a really critical piece of my life, I think, is living a life as a part of a landscape. I've lived in a lot of places, worked in a lot of places, and it's totally shaped me. And then examples about all of these things using art, science, math, society, culture, politics, history, and I don't know, and other things. So this is where we're going. So first of all, where is Judy? I live in Blaine, and Rowan did not know where that was. So I thought maybe some of you might also be new, or you just haven't thought of Blaine for a while. So I moved, I have lived in Washington before, but I moved back in 2019 from Colorado. And for a little over a year, I lived just south of that top red arrow, 2 blocks from the Peace Arch Park, which was lovely. Nice to see people going back. And then, for the past year, they haven't really gone anywhere. And then at the end of last year, I moved out into the Birch Bay area. So on this map, all of the tan part is Blaine. You can see that Blaine it's an odd shape. So there's downtown Blaine and that long strip going out east, and then all this area around Birch Bay. And the upper Bay area, if you don't know, that is Drayton Harbor. Semiahmoo Point is there, and you can see the picture of the sailboat heading out of Drayton Harbor. So that's where I am right now. And so I chose these 3 words to kind of describe me best. Maker, mother, mender, that's what's on my website. Why maker? I've always been a maker, at least since I learned to sew at 9, but maybe before. I do remember making mud pies too. I never wanted to, in all of the years that I have been weaving, spinning, and doing all these things, I just never really wanted to jump in that whole art craft divide. It's always been there. If you're a textile person, what are you? Are you a textile artist, or what are you? So even though I was an art curator for 7 years, that sometimes made me crazy that we were still even talking about it. So I just, I'm a maker. Makers that's a huge group. Lots of people are makers. I also always mention being a mom, as it has completely shaped who I am. I have 3 sons, 3 daughter-in-laws, and 9 grandchildren. And then a mender. Where does that come from? I think from growing up on a farm where everything was reused, recycled, repaired, mended, and it's who I want to be. Also, traveling much of the world has influenced this idea of mending between people and countries. Perhaps I could have also added blogger, but that doesn't really feel like part of me. That's just something that I do or have done. So I put these websites up here, clothgirl.com. That's my website. There's 2 pages that have blogs. I'm not very good about writing new ones right now. Too busy, too much moving. Cloth Roads, if you know of Cloth Roads, it's a small studio that was in Loveland, Colorado. It closed before I left, right before I left in 2019, but it is still online. So if you go to clothroads.com and go to the blog and search Judy Newland, I think I wrote more than 30 blogs for them over the almost 4 years. Many were on natural dyes, but all about culture and some book reviews and that kind of stuff. And then Weave a Real Peace, an organization I have belonged to since 2005 that supports cooperatives, weaving cooperatives and textile co-ops around the world. I also blogged for them. I was on the board for 6 years, mostly trying to figure out how to get younger people, a demographic that doesn't really join things, to be interested in things like this. That's my anthropology, and like I love demographics and what's going on in the world. So that's why that stuff is there. So then the world of textiles word cloud contains topics that I'm going to touch on. I love making these word clouds. It's just fun. And then kind of looking at, okay, is this my world? Is this my world of textiles? But for me, there are no textiles without cultural influences. We don't make stuff or create in a vacuum. So this talk explores all of those influences on me and others. To be human is to be involved with thread and cloth. Cloth in some form has been around since the beginning of time, and we all continue the thread in one way or another. So, material culture. This is one of my favorite subjects because I make stuff and I study stuff. And I love this. The stuff we make makes us. I feel this is true. This photo is at the Santa Fe Folk Art Market. This is a man from Africa selling djembe drums. I also play the djembe. And I thought, whoa, there were hundreds of drums there. It was just the coolest thing ever. So what does that stuff, those drums, say about his culture, me, our culture? Those are the questions. So because of my love for material culture, I have to give you a tiny lecture on material culture. I put this one book up because Henry Glassy was he's one of the early people who wrote about material culture. He was at Indiana University. I believe he's still alive, but he's retired. If you're looking for more reading, he's an interesting man. So there are many definitions of material culture. I like the part of culture that takes material form and the study of things. Pretty straightforward. Material culture studies includes artifacts that are made by humans, not specimens, which are found in nature, unless they have been changed or shaped by human hands. So that would be like a shell. If we find a shell on the beach, that's a specimen of nature. It's not material culture. But if someone takes all of those shells that they collect and make something out of them or add them to a ceremonial costume, it becomes material culture. My favorite part of material culture is that it's interdisciplinary. It crosses art history, design, anthropology, history, folklore, museum studies, more and more. My whole career has been in interdisciplinary experiential institutions. And so that's one reason why I just love material culture. In recent years, the study of material culture and things have regained actually a more central position in academia, which is kind of unusual because that's kind of a practical thing to study. Particularly strong work is being done, interestingly enough, by archaeologists in the UK. Tim Ingold is an easy read and writes some great things about the world of material culture. So in museums and academic research, artifactual evidence, which is stuff, is primary evidence. Artifacts are tools as well as signals, signs, and symbols. So we have many, many years of human history that there was no written record, but there are objects. So those are evidence to try to figure out what was going on with those people. And I love this quote by a material culture scholar. The things that humankind makes and uses at any particular time and place are probably the truest representation we have of values and meaning within a society. So the stuff we make is important. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the lives of objects. This is an idea for material culture. You might be like, what? Objects don't have lives. Well, material culture people talk about objects as if they have lives. And we're going to talk a little bit about traveling textiles. So the objects that we keep around us have layers of meaning related only to us or to those close to us, say family quilts or souvenirs. But objects can speak these questions. Who are you? Who are you connected to? And where are you in history? Objects change identity through time and place. This is something that museum people feel quite strongly about. It's a different way to look at objects, museum collections, and our own art and craft projects. As time passes, they are mended, they get repaired in a museum, they get recycled. They travel from maker to market to home and back again. They carry the hand of the maker, and they tell us stories if we will listen. So I have a little story I want to tell you about a traveling textile. So traveling textiles, this is an indigo piece. It belongs to me. It's about 4x6. It's large. Its story is that it was picked up in a market in Africa by two people who visited to America. They were Americans who visited Africa all the time, visited markets, bought stuff, brought them back to sell to various museum gift shops in the United States. So at the college I worked at, the Anthropology Museum had a gift shop. And they brought some wonderful things. And that is where I purchased this. And it had a little bit of information on it. And I knew it was from the Ibu people, but that's about all. So then, I have a great textile collection that I love and use in teaching with students and whatever. But when I went down to Arizona State University, this, after some time, was hanging above my desk in my office because I thought it was just such a great and interesting piece. And one of my colleagues who worked on the other side of the building, I didn't see him that much. He was in advising. He called me up and said, I want to come down. I have a question for you. His name was Bate. He's originally from Cameroon. So I'm just waiting, I'm working and I'm waiting for Bate to come down and talk to me. And he steps in the door. He's never been in my office before and just kind of goes, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, very powerful symbols, very powerful symbols. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what? Tell me, So he said, okay, so, I am from Cameroon and these are symbols from the Leopard Society of Cross River, which is, partly in Cameroon, but I'm going to show you this map just so you can get a picture here. Nigeria and Cameroon. So the little blow up part is down in the southeast corner of Nigeria, and that is where Cross River is, and that is where this textile came from. So Bhatti explained to me, he said, so the Leopard Society, the people that ran the society, it was men, and they had different ranks, and they wore these textiles. And the images on it, like the crocodile and the snake and these various images, all are symbols of power and actually represent the Leopard Society. So I said, wow, this was really good. And I said, Bate, do I need to take it down? I mean, is it like hanging up a sand painting rug of the Navajo, which some people would be okay with, but some people would not? And he's like, no, that's okay. And then, we did our chit chat and he went on his way. And, I thought about it as an anthropologist for a while, and I actually did take it down because it was sensitive to him. And I felt like it was a very important object. And so I have shared this. If you were here with me, we would be passing it around and you could touch it and look at it more carefully. But but its story is one you can see of traveling through time and space. I don't know when it was made, but we could get close to some dates when, you know, these pieces were still being made. It traveled to the United States. It came to me. It traveled to Arizona. And I still have it here in Washington, but I do believe that its life will at some point continue. When I find somebody else who this is very important to culturally, then I will probably give it to them. So, traveling textiles. I love that story, even though I scared Bate quite a bit. Okay, just one other example of traveling trade textiles and what they mean. These are block printed pieces from India. They've been made for hundreds of years. And one of my colleagues owned, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these. He did all of his work in Thailand and in Southeast Asia, and he's a textile collector. So they were, again, part of his collection. They had traveled from, you know, Southeast Asia and from India to wherever he purchased them in a market. And the interesting thing about these, I couldn't find a photo of the exhibit. This was an entire exhibit of probably 30 or 40 of these, which was quite beautiful. They have different meanings in different cultures that they were traded with. So in medieval Islamic societies, these fabrics were very utilitarian and used as household furnishings. In Indonesia and Malaysia, they were ritual and symbolic. They were used for dress, gift exchange, decorating religious spaces, and to honor their ancestors. In Thailand, they were totally reserved for court, distributed according to rank and social stratification. And in Japan, they were an unusual textile, not of Japan. So the desire for the exotic was part of that. And so, you know, we talked to people as they came into the exhibit about their experiences. Some of them had these textiles, had seen them before, and they meant different things to all of these people. It depended on their experience. So you can see, again, textiles traveling actually the world and having a life. And these textiles were part of a gift then that this colleague gifted to the Phoenix Art Museum. And that's where they live right now. So, okay, on to museum anthropology, which, you know, museum anthropology is a small part of cultural anthropology, and it's people who work in museums. But it doesn't mean that we do visitor studies or that type of thing. It's a cultural way of creating exhibitions where we try to engage as many stakeholders as we can, and people who are important to the story. So this is an exhibit that I actually curated from afar. This is at the CU Museum of Anthropology, or Natural History, I should say, in Boulder, where I had, this is my alma mater, one of them. And I had already gone to Arizona and they wanted me to curate this. So I have an entire talk about curating from afar, which is interesting and kind of funny because it was hard. But this was you're seeing two different iterations. They were 4 months of 3 different iterations. So the first one was down on the lower right. This was Diamonds. The one up at the top, it was called Dreams. Those are pictorial for the most part. These are all from the collection of CU Museum. And then there was a third one called Landscape. The thing was, you know, this is one view and one story of this collection. And this is what we need to tell our visitors. I'll go here because this is a picture of Melanie Yazzie, who is Navajo. She's an art professor at CU. And I knew her. We worked together as partners on that entire exhibition because it needed to be a story coming from the Navajo. And so she contributed. She helped pick the pieces, deciding what we were going to write about them, along with other people, but she was my main partner. So the lower left here, this is Rose Dedmond in Window Rock on the reservation. We're doing a big giant dye pot. We spent days collecting stuff and made all these wonderful dye pots. And the little tapestry piece is, I made that from what came out of those dye pots on the Navajo reservation in this little piece, which is actually, the design is Chinese coins, quilt design. And it was attached to my curator's statement at this exhibition. Just trying to talk about, to thank the people that had helped me, and how we explore culture through, doing and meeting people and sharing textiles. And after this exhibit finally closed, I gave this to Melanie, and so I guess she still has it. And then, just sharing what we know through learning other, I have studied with several Navajo weaving teachers, and, sharing that with other people at the museum. So, but it's important for us in an exhibit to tell our visitors what we're doing, to be transparent in our process. That is what museum anthropology is. And I have to, I'm going to go back here, but I want to just tell you a brief thing about working at the Arizona State University Museum of Anthropology. Is a small museum, and it was all glass fronted. So when people came into our building, it was the first thing you saw, and everybody could look in the windows at whatever you were doing. So if there wasn't an exhibit open and we were we were creating one, we rarely locked the door, because we had to go in and out and work. So often people came in, and when we were creating exhibitions, and then they'd be like, "Oh, it's not done. Oh, sorry." And I always invited them in, took them on a tour of what we were doing, and said, "Here's how we make, text panels. Here's how we hang stuff on the wall. Here's my students working on this, that, and the other." And people probably were always more excited about that, seeing the process, than even the final project. So that too is a part of museum anthropology, engaging your audience and letting them be part of your experience. And it was just the most fun. I just loved it. So, I also did some other textile exhibits over time. I think I've organized over 100 exhibitions in my career. This was at the small private college, and the top one, this is Judy James. She did, these are all, if you know what you know about textiles, I don't know, these are discharge pieces. She was kind of mapping the Midwest, so it's a part of it. And then pieces from the collection at that museum. These are imperial Chinese robes. And there was a whole collection donated to this museum years and years ago. And this was part of an exhibit. And this piece of it was called Collecting as Entertainment, where we talked about these Chinese robes that robed emperors, right, were used by museum people and guests to dress up for parties. Now, that was a long time ago, right? But it's like, so there's another story about these robes, that went from emperors to, someone brought them from China to Wisconsin, and they became part of a collection, and people wore them. And those experiences are just, that's kind of crazy, but really interesting. So I want to move on then to life as landscape, because this has been such a important part of my life of textiles. This is Canyon de Chelly. I've spent a lot of time on the Navajo reservation. This is the same, canyon down the way where you could see Spider Rock, where our, the myths of spider women came from here. And it's just like a fantastic, fantastic landscape. And so you think about that when you think about those Navajo rugs and the landscape that the people lived in and how much that influenced them. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through my life as landscape, because it really has shaped me. So I grew up on a farm in Iowa, corn, soybeans, and man, I was only maybe, 6 or 7 or maybe older there, but that is really tall corn. And I think it's funny because I'm out in that field drinking a Pepsi, and we never got Pepsi when I was a kid. So I don't know what was going on. But that was my foundation, growing up on a farm, gardening, working on the farm, picking up rocks and everything else that had to happen on a farm way back, really tied me to the land. And so that's where it started. And then I lived out here over on the east side in the desert for 25 years. And just came to love the desert. Was in desert fiber arts for almost all of that time, learned to weave, spin, dye, use dye plants, sagebrush, rabbit brush, etc. But it became such a part of me, and my creativity, and just met some wonderful people. Still have friends over there. And then to Colorado for graduate school. And there's another desert, high desert steppe region around Boulder. Fabulous. Spent a lot of time hiking and being in my environment. And then Wisconsin, back to the Midwest for 7 years, where I ran the art museum, but the anthropology museum was like, 50 feet away. And so we all worked together a lot, and it was a great experience. I don't remember doing as much creating there, probably because I worked like 50 or 60 hours a week and did like 75 exhibits in 7 years. It's crazy. But still, it's a part of that landscape that obviously has surrounded and shaped me. So then Arizona, which the Sonoran Desert, there's something about that desert that just so inspired me and pulled me out into the landscape, either hiking or in my backyard, working with the plants and natural dyes. Not that I wasn't busy, because I was, and it's horrible in the summer, and I did not get to leave in the summer. But my time in Arizona totally shaped me, and I seem to produce more. So, you've got the cochineal growing on the cactus, actually killing the cactus if you don't clean it off. And, this eco-dyed piece, which, that's like my neighborhood. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about that backpack out there by the creosote bush in a little bit. Eucalyptus in your backyard everywhere. This beautiful silver dollar eucalyptus actually grew on campus. So I was always thieving all of the leaves that fell off of it for my work. This is a pretty big piece. It's just called My Arizona because it totally is. And then, okay, so this piece I actually made when I had moved from Arizona back to Colorado, but the whole idea came out of that time there in the, Sonoran Desert. And this was in a little exhibit in Vancouver for Textiles Society of America. But I want to read you what I feel about this piece, because this totally captures my experience in Arizona. So the Sonoran Desert is my inspiration for this small work of art. This unique desert holds many secrets, delightful and dark. Native desert plants yield dye colors to explore and appreciate, while border crossings require thoughtful soul searching. While delivering water to hidden stations in Organ Pipe National Monument, I often found scraps of cloth left behind, sometimes entire blankets, which I used to create art pieces in honor of the missing. These tiny wool bundles in this piece represent the souls lost in the vastness of the Sonoran Desert, the disappeared, the desperate, the forgotten ones. Wrapped in the colors of the Southwest Mexico and Central America, some bundles are tied, some are loose, some show wear and tear from a dangerous crossing. How many are lost in this mesmerizing world of heat and beauty? We'll never know, but they are now profoundly anchored to this landmark and threads in the social fabric of our lives. So that bit is about how my landscape and material culture has shaped me and the things that I do. You can see I still have blue hair. In that picture, that's actually woad, which doesn't last very long, and my hair is dyed in indigo. So I want to talk about, hang on. This social practice art. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong side. All of this work that you've seen that I'm doing, led to my firm belief of how much textiles are embedded in culture. I mean, I already knew that, I already believed it, but this just really embrace that. And, I feel quite strongly about the fact that there is no art without culture, and social projects, social practice art is kind of like, speaks to that. So I talked about the backpack out in the desert. So you can see me standing there by the water barrels that we were filling up at Organ Pipe. And one time, they always sent us out to look around and make sure there weren't any people out there in the desert. And I found this blanket and a pair of sunglasses, and you can see the sunglasses still on the backpack. And the guy who organized this, he said, you should keep that, and it was covered with dirt and, sandburrs, and it was a mess. But I'm like, okay, yeah, I should. Nobody was going to come by that way again, probably, and take it. So anyway, what I did was I kept it. I don't know how long before I finally cleaned it up, cut it in strips, and wove that backpack. And it was in a little exhibit at ASU. But then my friend and I, my friend who lives in Tucson, we filled it up with water and granola bars and took it back out in the desert and left it there. So I don't know where it is. But that kind of thing, very meaningful, hoping to share culture and some hope with people. The quilt, that was another huge project in Phoenix called Ground Cover. Two of my students and I made that quilt. It was different colors on both sides. And I think there were like 350 at least that were made. And it was in support of the indigenous people in the area. And they all, in the end, all of these quilts went to indigenous people. And then my Indigo Girl, those are just pieces I make that they're like 7 feet tall, and they're all different kinds of weaving and felting and whatever. And they address like cultural practices and identity issues. I have about 7 of them now, I think. So, and then again, more social practice art. You're all probably familiar with Judy Chicago and her dinner party. This honor quilt was another project that she did later. And there are like 500 and some of these triangles that were made by people all over the world in honor of women. And I was asked by a friend to help install this exhibit. I mean, this is only a tiny piece. Everything that didn't have to be conserved was hung in multiple galleries in this museum. The first time ever all of the pieces had been shown. So it's kind of like the AIDS quilt. Many projects like that were embedded in culture, right? And then the little quilt on the right, I made with students in a class about world culture and textiles, and probably 1 of 15 knew how to sew, but we managed to make a pretty good quilt. So that was super fun. They were so excited. We were studying at the time the Amish. So every group that we studied, we then did a project that related to that culture. And so how do you create community with quilt making? And then just a little snip of a Kantha quilt. They're made in India from recycled materials, and a very community-driven kind of project. So, and other sharing cultural practices, beautiful piece from Native Hawaiians in the Bishop Museum, but somebody was there sharing how to make feathered pieces. So getting to know, the details of that kind of thing. And then on the right, that is Mehmet from Turkey. He was teaching, a large group of women how to make them, these beautiful Turkish felted rugs. So just sharing of knowledge is like so important and just so wonderful. So science and math. I thought I would do a few examples because sometimes we don't really think about textiles and math. And so the quipu in Peru are probably such a great example. They're beautiful objects. I mean, I did research in Peru 3 different summers. These things are just so beautiful as objects of communication, as well as counting is what we know them for. In the Quechua language, quipu means knot, so that makes sense. It's usually consists of cotton or camelid, depending on where they came from. These are from the Inca, time period. And the Inca people used them for collecting data, keeping records, monitoring tax obligations, properly collecting census records, pretty cool, calendrical information, and for military organizations. And I just read this recently. archaeologists are now suggesting that authors may have used quipu to compose and preserve their epic poems and legends, which I'm not sure how they can figure that out, but because there are relatively few words in Quechua, they could be used as pronunciation keys on the chords, and then you could, it would be like a memory device, which I thought was pretty cool. And a couple more, science things, which is so cool. The sequence knitting, I don't know if any of you have seen that book. I like it because it's a way of making all these patterns just by repeating sequences, and you don't need a pattern. I mean, that is the pattern. I kind of like that. I'm not a very good pattern person. But this other basketry piece, so weaving a tale of strange weather, basket weaving and astronomy may seem like strange bedfellows, but Natalie Maybach, who I've never met, never even heard of her till I saw this, it's evidence that it's kind of a beautiful duo. So using climate change data in her work, she assigns colors and shapes to different variables like temperature and wind strength. So in this piece, each pair of vertical spokes is assigned an hour of the day. The green round reed is twilight data. The yellow flat reed is sun data. The red and orange sticks are high and low tide readings. Cool. And the blue balls are the number of whales sighted at the particular day and hour and so on. So she's from kind of the Boston area, but this weather research she did like on the East Coast. So I'm like, oh, so cool. So very cool. And then you've probably maybe seen some of the coral reef productions that have traveled around. There's a whole book about the math of coral reefs and these reproductions. And also this really kind of fun little crochet book on hyperbolic geometry in crochet. So many kind of sciencey things we can do with fiber and textiles. I like it. Okay, indigo can kind of be my thing, consuming thing. So exploring the world of indigo in Science in the Dye Pot. I mean, indigo as a bat, a dye bat is very different. Its chemistry is unusual and fascinating, and you could spend your whole life, and people do, studying it because it's just so interesting. And just another thought about indigo, it's been around for millennia. It's been used for ornamentation, religious ritual, symbols, political, social status. But this occurred, independently all around the world. So I just think that's kind of interesting to point out. And I want to, this is Gasali Adeyemu. Indigo has multiple techniques and processes. He was in Denver, and we did a jury workshop, and I was staying at my friend's house, and Gasali was also staying there. So I probably got to know him better than I would have if I was just attending the workshop. So it was a fantastic thing. And he lives in Santa Fe, but he's from Nigeria, and he has a couple of smaller children, and he may go back. He visits every year. He calls his mom every day. It was so sweet. I just love that. And he was such an open and sharing person. I wrote a blog about this experience that was called The Man Who Could Be King. And people are like, what? So I wanted to share this little bit of story, Gasali's story, with you. Because it was called Sharing Culture and He May Be King. Sharing our stories. Sharing the textile stories of our lives is why most of us do what we do. Gasali's story stretches across the continents and cultures and now surrounds us in Colorado. That's when I lived in the Rocky Mountains. We are now part of the story. So where do we go from here? We can heed Gasali's motto and share the knowledge with everyone. But what about this man who could be king? In Gasali's village, Afiedo, meaning little village, 3 families rotate the responsibility of caring for the community through kingship. So if Gasali returns to Nigeria, he could someday serve in this role of king. And so our friend may one day lead his village into a brave new future, sharing his message of love and the spirit of indigo with the world. So that was just a wonderful experience and a wonderful story of indigo. And this is Grace's story of indigo. This is in El Salvador. And the photo with Grace there, this kind of orangey, she's standing out where she's explaining to us how they process their indigo, very much like in India, in big, big tanks. But her story is, okay, it's a family story. Her grandfather owned all this land in El Salvador. And they farmed it, and historically they produced indigo there. But when the Civil War hit, it was dangerous, and his grandfather moved them, I think, to Boston. I'd have to go check, but anyway. And she basically, I think she was 9, and she grew up there, lived a long time. She's married to a French guy, and probably in the early 2000s, when things were safe and calmed down again, she went to visit, and they had pretty much given up on the cooperative farming that was instituted during, the Civil War. And she bought as much of the land back as she could for her family. Not all of it, but much of it. And the hacienda, you see just a little bit of the hacienda up at the top there. It was still there. It had to be, redone, but she did it. She built a dye studio. She has a company and sells the Guatemalan indigo. And it was just such a marvelous experience. And there's more about her on the DVD Blue Alchemy, if you've seen that or you find it. But, this is a political story. I mean, it's also, a cultural story and a family story, but it always just stood out to me as politics. Wow. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful experience. And then history, of course, there's history in the dye pot and in textiles. And in 2016, this fragment was discovered in northern Peru, Huaca Prieta. And it's, 6,200 years old, and the oldest known cotton textile in the world, and the oldest known textile decorated with indigo blue. That was pretty cool. Huaca Prieta is the area up in the north where they have those little boats that they grow their own reeds and make their reed boats, caballitos, and they look like little horses out in the ocean. It's super cool. But that's just so exciting, proving that, indigo may have, the oldest piece has been found in Peru. How cool is that? It's very cool. So what about gardening? What about gardening and plants? There are science and social aspects. I grew indigo in Colorado. I could get one crop up there in the Mile High place. But I did it as an experience and to share with people. And I have this interest in plants ever since I read The Botany of Desire, which is kind of a crazy cool book, and scientists are like, yeah, whatever. But when you think about the questions, do things make people? Does the landscape make people? We make landscapes, but do landscapes make people? I think they do. And in The Botany of Desire, he talks about, plants, do they affect our behavior by the way that they grow? Not that they're talking to us, but by the way they grow to things that they need. I just think it's, how do plants influence people? Because they certainly do. So I would recommend that you read this newer book. It's now several years old, but if you haven't seen Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, it's Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. It's fantastic. I think it's my favorite book. It is a Native American woman who has a PhD in botany. And so she's trying to bridge these great divides, and she does a beautiful job doing it. And I have this braided ring of sweetgrass that I always keep on my nightstand, and I can still, it's my favorite smell, and that's my favorite book. So I wanted to share that with you. This is my Washington dye garden. This is the community garden, downtown Blaine. Not just for plants, for people. People do grow food. We grow a lot of food for the food bank. I'm the only one growing dye plants there, partly because the Boys and Girls Clubs use the garden, and I want to share the dyeing with them. We couldn't do it, in 2020, but perhaps this summer. So that wonderful community dye garden experience is so part of textiles and sharing culture to me, because we will be using textiles. So this is just a list of some of the most important species around, varieties around the world that we use, and it's including woad. Fresh leaf indigo, if you haven't used fresh leaf, so if you only can grow a little bit of indigo, it seems like what's the point, right? You can't really make, you know, a lot of indigo paste. You can do fresh leaf and you get this turquoise color on silk, and you can pound in it. So we'll do this kind of stuff with the kids probably this next summer if we can. And woad, oh, woad by any other name. Woad is an entire history in and of itself. It's French blue. It's so important to European and the Middle East. So I grew woad in Colorado because I wanted to be part of that history. You know, I gotta do it. I gotta check out this plant. I wanted to understand the plant. Why is it considered an invasive species in Colorado, as it is also here? But I grew it in my backyard, and you know, it's a biennial. And if you harvest it the second year before it goes to seed, it's just not going to hurt anyone. And so I did that, and I had one big 5-gallon bucket of woad leaves, and this is what I got out of it: a skein of yarn, some fabric, and some fiber. And it was just so wonderful. And I was telling my drumming friends about this, and they all wanted to plant. So I hope they aren't like, you know, spreading woad across Colorado. But the most interesting thing was Joe, who was one of the drummers. He wanted to plant, but he worked for the Boulder Conservation Group and went around, and, you know, he's one of the people who goes and tries to find invasive species and root them out. He wanted a plant so he could plant it in their demo garden to show people what woad would look like and what it could do, and to talk about the history of it. So that was just super cool. So I think there's still woad growing back in Colorado. I know there's places here that grows woad, but they will not even tell you where it is. Like, we would go and harvest it and use it up and get rid of it, but they won't tell you. So, okay, so be it. So a few more cultural cloth and examples here to wind down. These are Peruvian textiles. Chiribaya, which you may have never heard of. It's a culture that was the culture before the Inca took over. It's not very well known, about 700s to 1200s AD. Spanish came in 1526, so Inca are in between there. These are all natural dyes. This is probably cochineal, but it could be relbunium, which is a plant that grows there that also makes red. We will never know unless it's got scientific testing, which is very expensive, so they're not going to do it. They also had indigo and many other plants of colors. These are grave goods. They came out of graves and they look this good. It's kind of amazing. So I just want to show you a little bit of some of the work that I did down there. Field work and conservation. I would call this field conservation because I'm doing some work on a sidewalk outside, and everything is kind of outside. They don't have really expensive conservation labs, except maybe in Lima. A student up in the upper left there working on a piece. So much of what you pull out of these digs are fragments. And so she's just lightly attaching them to tie back to preserve them till someone can study them. And the gentleman down at the lower right, he's actually unwrapping a mummy of a child. I think he didn't completely unwrap it. He just took the cover off, but it was kind of interesting. And then you can see what it's like out in the field there. The textiles are usually just all over the ground, and there's some bones and there's some issues. So at the upper left, that is the Atacama Desert, where much of the graves and the textiles are there preserved, because sometimes it doesn't rain in 20 years. And you could see the problems, piles of textiles, and also these bones. Sorry, I hope that doesn't disturb you, but this is what it looks like because so many archaeology sites are looted. So the looters are after ceramics because they are the most, they get the most money for those. And it's very difficult to then figure out where the textiles came from. And it's a problem. The government works on it, and the archaeologists try to cover their sites so that people won't know that they were there, but it's difficult. And then Rosa, she and I are making a warp there on a backstrap loom. She was the conservator at the little museum that we were working at, and also a weaver though. And I have a little story about her. No, I guess I'll just say, so right before we got to this museum in Ilo, which is like 40 miles from Chile, maybe 12 to 15 of the nicest textiles in the museum had been stolen. And so very upsetting, but you know, they tried to blame it on Rosa. Rosa is an indigenous Aymara people, but she is a trained conservator, and of course it wasn't her, but that's how things work. And probably was security, probably was some collector came through and said, oh, I want these 10 pieces for my collection, and paid somebody to steal them. And it happens, and you know, they do the best they can, but she was just devastated. And it was just such a sad thing because, you know, she probably spent 6 months on every one of those pieces, restoring them to be good enough to put on display. So there's some issues there. So again, sharing cultures, it's just my way of learning. Weaving is a way of learning about culture. The middle photo there is the Spider Rock girls, and 3 generations spinning together, and we were doing a dye thing. I just wanted to throw that in there because I have had so many wonderful experiences with the Navajo people. And Oaxaca, spent some time there visiting lots of families. But these 2 girls on the left, they're actually traveled from Chiapas, which is really out in the middle of nowhere. And they are the 2 girls taking over their co-op in their village to run it after the elders are kind of moving on. And they actually have an outlet in Las Cruces, New Mexico, called Weaving for Justice. So you could, and that's where they sell their goods. So this was kind of all also related to the Weave a Real Peace group when I was down there, as well as all of this, all these experiences in Guatemala. Julio up at the top is now runs Mayan Hands on the ground, and we're visiting dyers and learning to weave and just enjoying some cultural activities, which have been such a great part of my travels. And then I just wanted to throw this in because I was lucky enough in my work life to twice get to experience and work with the Tibetan monks who make the sand mandalas. First in Colorado, it was so great. Then when I went to Wisconsin, I'm like, we're doing this too. So, you know, ritual and religion, so many rituals, opening rituals to get everything ready. And then they spend 4 or 5 days creating this mandala with little tiny, blowing colored sand in little tiny straws. Super cool. People coming all the time to watch them, experiencing the culture. And then when they're done, they sweep it all together. And this is the procession down to the river that was there because all the sand mandalas go into water to be dispersed out into the world, taking good messages out into the world. So very, very, it was just amazing. And their clothing is just so wonderful. So more sharing of textiles around the world. So I want to close with this. This is Spinzilla some years back. Some of you might know about Spinzilla, where the whole world is kind of spinning in the same week. So spinning a world, I just love this. All these women from up above. Well, there's some men too, sorry. Just spinning and chatting and sharing, stories and culture. And so I have just this kind of one final story that is about this melding and mending of cultures through threads that I'd like to leave you with. It illustrates to me the connections that we have through cloth. So this was actually on a tapestry list that I was on some time ago. And it was written by a young a young man named Jehan. His background is Islamic. He was writing on the subject of spirituality and religion in tapestry weaving, but it was just so wonderful, this little story he told. I had been taught by my auntie that the spirit of the ages runs through a single piece of yarn being spun. It may start at your fingers and go onto the wheel or on your spindle, but the other end connects you to this important link through all of the other people who spin and weave. That is what that tingle at your fingertips that you feel is. It eliminates the need for language, and you will find that spinners of different language groups will spin together and exchange the threads that they have spun. So again, the stuff we make makes us, and it's really all a cloth conspiracy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy, for your wonderful presentation. We've now reached the Q&A portion of the evening. So if you have any questions or comments for Judy, you can either turn on your video and raise your virtual hand, or use the chat box feature at the bottom of your screen, or simply just unmute yourself and ask your question.
You want me to stop sharing so we have, okay.
Yeah, that works, Judy.
What?
If we have a lot of questions all at once, then Rowan and I can call on people. But
sounds good.
We'll see those.
Hi, I'm Nisha. I'll ask a question. I was wondering if you had ever seen, was a book that a photographer did, I can't even remember, probably more than 10, maybe 15 years ago, but where he traveled all over the world, and he asked people to move the contents of their house outside and stack them in front of their house, and then photograph the people with the contents
Yes.
of their house outside their house.
Yes.
I was in the Foreign Service and I lived all over the world, but I was very struck. We spent a lot of time in Central Asia, that a lot of people in Central Asia, it was like 80% of the contents of their house were some sort of textile.
I do remember that book. For some reason, I remember seeing it first in an airport and thinking I didn't ever buy it. I have way too many books, but it was so amazing. That is so amazing. First of all, how much stuff we had in the United States, and other people didn't have that much stuff. But yeah, very, very textiles, so important.
Your local librarian is looking for the title of that book.
Okay.
You soon.
You can Google it. Yeah.
I thought maybe it was National Geographic, but I can't remember.
I don't know. It might have been.
Right.
I think they might have had some pictures from that project in the magazine.
So can I ask how many of you people out there are textile people? Are you all textile people? Or tell me who you are.
Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Wait, Crispy?
I would say I'm more of a an art quilter, but basic traditional quilting as well as art quilting.
Mm-hmm.
And I also am a quilter. I've done knitting in the past, and I like to dabble with dyeing and dyeing my own fabric. Small amounts, but but mostly what I do is quilting. Right now I'm making lots of masks, but
Yes, aren't we all?
when this is done, it'll go back to only quilts.
Cool. Very cool.
I'm an avid knitter and embroiderer.
So where did you learn to knit? I'm curious.
I learned to knit from a family friend when I was very, very young, probably
Okay.
when I was like 5 or something.
I'm only asking because when I was, it was actually the first time I went to Peru, so I don't know, 2003 or something. One of the young gals in the group was from Philadelphia, and she's like, "Oh, I just learned how to knit," and we all learned how to knit in a bar, which I just thought. So at the time, that's what was happening, right? It was the demographic of that group. They all went to the bar and had a beer and taught each other how to knit, which I like. Cool.
I'm a knitter. Did a lot of scarves and knitted felted hats.
I'm not a very good knitter. I like to knit, but I can't follow a pattern. So I just like, yeah.
If I pause this for a second, it looks like this book was called Material World, A Global Family Portrait,
Yes,
and the artist was Menzel.
sounds right. Yeah, it's worth taking a look.
And it does look like it was featured in National Geographic, so well done collectively.
Worth taking a look at. Yeah, interesting. I just remember being kind of almost embarrassed that, the United States couldn't even fit all their stuff in the picture.
Rowan, what was the name of the book again?
It was called, Material World, A
Okay.
Global Family Portrait.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and Crispy, I can look into where that's available too.
Okay.
Great.
I'm not really a knitter, but I have a good little bit of knitting story. I started to learn how to knit in grade school. And they were teaching us in school, but we moved all the time. And before I learned, all I learned was the knit stitch. I didn't learn how to purl. And we moved. And so sometimes I would knit where I would just knit the knit stitch. That's all I could do was knit the knit stitch. And occasionally through my life, I would buy knitting needles and some yarn and I would start knitting. And once upon a time, I did this in college. And I think at that point, I taught myself to purl. So I could knit and purl, but I wasn't doing any pattern. I was just knitting a piece of cloth and it was blue. And I would sit in the dorm lounge knitting, and people would come up and ask me what I was doing and ask me to show them how. So I would show them how to knit, and people would knit a row or two on this piece, which soon became very uneven because all different people had knitted rows. But one of the people was a good friend of mine who also lived in the same dorm, and we're still friends to this day. And she actually got really into knitting and is now very well known in the world of knitting. She's written books and is a knitting editor, Melanie Fallick. And when she was a knitting editor, once she told that little story in the opening thing of the magazine where the editor always, does a little thing each month about how she'd first time she ever knitted was when a friend of hers was knitting in the lounge and let her knit a couple of rows. So, and I still can't knit to this day.
It's so cool though, because I think everybody has some kind of a story, whether it's your family history and quilts and whatever, that relates to cloth and textiles. And it's just kind of been my life, and still is. So. Any other questions about travels or whatever? Any of you been to Peru?
Ecuador, not Peru. Linda's been to Peru.
Yeah, it's a
Linda's been all over the world.
it's a fabulous place. I absolutely loved it. I haven't been down there for quite a while because we ran out of money to pay for whatever our research, but I loved the people, and I was mostly on the coast, but I did get to go to the highlands, and everyone must go to Machu Picchu in their life.
Well, thank you so much, Judy.
You're welcome. I'm